For my final project, I'm going to talk about the education of deaf children in Jamaica and my experience with that in my 5 weeks at Knockpatrick School for the Deaf. Before I arrived at Knockpatrick, I had no idea the amount of work that goes into teaching deaf children. I just assumed that teaching them was about the same as the education that I received in the States, with the exception of teaching them on their hands rather than speaking in front of the classroom. I was very wrong. I had no idea how much work goes into teaching them, and I had never really thought that much into it. Teaching wasn't really my area. I want to be an interpreter, so I guess I never really thought about it. For me, service started off pretty slow. For the first week, I would teach about a class a day, just because the teachers wouldn't show up. So I would be substituting a class of about 3 or 4 students. And it was fairly easy because it was usually the level 4 or 5 children, so they could sign pretty well and they could understand me. Later on, the next week, I got assigned to bulletin board duty, which meant I literally sat in the library all day, cutting out people, animals, letters, whatever I needed out of construction paper to make a bulletin board. I ended up making 2 bulletin boards, and it wasn't quite what I was expecting in terms of one-on-one interaction with the children. The next week, it was during club time. I was leading crafts with the pre-primary children, and the teacher of the pre-primary class was sitting in the room while I assisted the students making their cards. And I was very interested, and so I decided to ask the teacher how she teaches the deaf children that don't have very much language. At that time, I had already gotten to know the children pretty well, and so I knew which kids, their level of language acquisition, and so I knew which kids could understand more sign and which kids maybe really properly knew how to use and understand a few signs. So I asked the teacher, how do you teach your children? How do you start off when a child comes in with very little language whatsoever? And we sat and we had a very in-depth conversation about that. And at the end of our conversation, she invited me to come join her class for the rest of my time at Knockpatrick, and either just sit in and watch how she teaches, or in fact I could assist her in teaching the classroom. I was very excited about that. I was excited to not only be able to spend more one-on-one time with the children, but to further explore the logistics of teaching them and to hopefully make a difference in their lives. I learned a lot from working one-on-one with the deaf children, with the pre-primary class specifically. The day that stands out most in my mind, the day that I learned the biggest lesson in terms of teaching, was the first day that I actually was teaching them. We were sitting in the library and we were making cards for the parents that would be coming for Parents' Day later on in the week. Specifically, I was working with a little 4-year-old girl named Kayla, and we had on the table we had stickers and crayons and markers and stencils, basically anything that the children would need to help them make their cards for their parents. And Nikayla would point to a sticker that she wanted to use on her card, and she would look up at me and she would ask me, how do you sign that? And so I would sign butterfly, and she would look up at me and she would look at my sign and she would put her hands together and sort of work out the sign, and eventually she would sign butterfly. And I could see her really concentrating, really focusing, really trying to copy exactly what I signed. And when I realized how much she wanted to learn sign and how eager she was to learn what I was teaching her, I realized that there's much more to that sticker than just a butterfly. It was yellow, it was in the shape of a butterfly, and it was a sticker. So I started wondering, does she understand that is in the shape of a butterfly, or is she asking me what is the color or what is the object? So I started trying to teach her the concept of yellow as well. And so I'd point to the butterfly and sign yellow, and point to maybe a banana and sign yellow, and different things. And eventually she pointed to another sticker and moved it towards us and said yellow. And so I realized that she was actually learning from me. Very quickly she picked up on the concept of yellow. I was sure that at that point she understood me. It was it meant a lot to me, and I felt very accomplished that I was able to teach her signs for different shapes, different objects, and help her learn different concepts and the deeper aspects of language rather than just that that was a butterfly. In Jamaica, it's very common for deaf children to have hearing parents, and a lot of the time those parents don't sign, don't bother to learn sign, and most of the time they don't know anything about being deaf, deaf culture, the deaf community, ways they can get involved. There are cases where the Jamaican Deaf Village, which was nearby Mandeville, which I did a lot of interacting with, people there would offer to get involved with the parents, their deaf children, and the parents just, they weren't educated enough about it, so they would refuse or turn down the offer. Unfortunately, a lot of deaf children in Jamaica are either physically, verbally, or even sexually abused, because a lot of times people will think, well, this child can't speak, there's no way they can tell if I harm them. So a lot of the children at the school are very, they have been through a lot, even if they're only 4, 5, 6 years old. And so it's very important that they feel comfortable at school and get a good education. Even if they haven't been abused, it's still, the kids come in and they have, a lot of times they have very little language if their parents are hearing. They come in and maybe someone who should be at a kindergarten, first grade level is only, their language is only that of what a toddler would be. And it's really unfortunate. From what I saw, a lot of the parents couldn't afford to get their child back and forth to school if they took their child home on the weekends. And so, for example, say that Friday afternoon I was working with Brittany. I would be ready to work with her on Monday, and she wouldn't be there Monday. And then maybe she wasn't there on Tuesday. Maybe she wasn't even there on Wednesday because her mother couldn't afford to get her there. And Brittany's only 3 years old, and so it's a very important time in her life to get that language acquisition in her, to start her young, to have the deaf teacher as a role model, to have people working with her, to be around other deaf children. And since her mother couldn't afford it, a lot of the time she wasn't there. So there really are no regulations in Jamaica, at least in terms of the deaf school, to get that child on campus every weekend, and it puts a lot of the kids behind because it's a very common situation, at least at Knockpatrick it was. Working with the kids at Knockpatrick School for the Deaf was probably one of the most wonderful experiences of my life. I wasn't sure what to expect with SST, but coming out on the other end, I wouldn't have given it up, I wouldn't have changed it for anything. I learned a lot about deaf cultures in other countries. I learned a lot about how privileged deaf people are in America, how much the deaf people in Jamaica are really behind in terms of education, and as a country, Jamaicans really don't understand deaf people like people do here in America. Teaching the deaf children really gave me a different perspective on children, deaf children, teaching. I really was passionate about my work at Knockpatrick, and I am very thankful for the opportunity to have worked with them in the way that I did. Thank you.
Take the boy in the red.